The moment Emma Wilson saw the German shepherd dragging its bloodied body across their front yard, she froze at the window. The dog's matted fur glistened with what could only be blood in the early morning light, and between its powerful jaws hung something heavy, a canvas duffel bag, dirty and torn. 8-year-old Emma knew she should call for Grandpa Harold, but something in the animal's determined gaze held her still. The dog wasn't just wandering, it was coming directly toward their cabin with purpose. When the shepherd collapsed 15 feet from their porch, Emma broke her silence, screaming for her father. As David Wilson burst through the front door, the bag shifted, not from being dropped, but from something moving inside. Emma pushed past her startled father and ran toward the fallen animal. Before David could stop her, she had already unzipped the bag, revealing what lay inside, a tiny German shepherd puppy, barely breathing, its small body trembling with each shallow breath. The mother dog's eyes met Emma's, and in that moment the little girl who rarely spoke to humans heard the clearest message she'd ever received. Please save him. I've come so far. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The Wilsons hadn't always lived in isolation. 3 months earlier, they had been residents of Lakeside, a bustling town 2 hours from their current mountain cabin. Emma's father, David Wilson, had purchased the property after his wife Marie's death during a military operation 3 years ago. Marie had been a skilled dog handler in the Army, working alongside David in the K-9 unit. Her death left not only a husband grieving, but also an already quiet daughter retreating further into silence. Emma had been diagnosed with autism at age 4, where she struggled with human connection, avoiding eye contact, rarely speaking more than a handful of words at a time. She blossomed around animals. Marie had understood this, often bringing home rescue dogs for temporary fostering. After Marie died, their family dog Ranger had become Emma's sole confidant. When Ranger passed away from old age 3 months ago, Emma stopped speaking altogether. David Wilson, a tall man with prematurely graying temples and perpetual worry lines, had made the decision to move to his late father's hunting cabin in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. A fresh start, he called it, though his own father, Harold, questioned uprooting an already struggling child. Harold Wilson, a retired veterinarian of 68 years with a crown of silver hair and patient eyes, ultimately decided to join them, unable to bear the thought of Emma losing another connection. Their nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. The closest town, Pinecrest, boasted a population of just over 3,000, with a small veterinary clinic run by Dr. Sarah Mitchell. David and Sarah had a complicated history. They dated briefly before he met Marie, making their occasional necessary interactions awkward. The cabin itself sat on 15 acres of wooded land backing up to a national forest. Ranger Mike Thompson visited occasionally, checking permits and warning about recent poaching activity. He'd taken a liking to quiet Emma, often bringing wildlife books when he stopped by. Emma's room overlooked the front yard, where a tire swing hung from an ancient oak. It was from this window that she first spotted the wounded German shepherd that spring morning, setting into motion events that would forever change the trajectory of their broken family. None of them could have guessed that the dog's desperate journey was somehow connected to the very woman whose absence had driven them to these woods. David Wilson had seen many wounded animals during his military service, but something about this German shepherd struck him differently. Perhaps it was the intelligent, pleading look in her eyes, or the way she had deliberately brought her puppy to their doorstep. As Emma cradled the whimpering puppy, David knelt beside the mother dog, his experienced hands gently probing her wounds. "Harold," he called over his shoulder, "bring my med kit from the garage, and call Sarah. Tell her we're coming in with 2 severely injured dogs." Harold appeared on the porch, cell phone already in hand. His eyes widened at the scene before him. "Dear Lord," he murmured, disappearing momentarily, before returning with the military-grade medical kit David kept from his service days. "Emma, sweetie, I need to help the mama dog first," David said softly. Emma didn't respond verbally. She rarely did, but she nodded, her small fingers never ceasing their gentle stroking of the puppy's head. The mother, Shepherd, had multiple lacerations across her flank, and David could feel at least 2 broken ribs. More concerning was the bullet wound in her shoulder. Old, partially healed, but infected. This dog had been running on borrowed time, driven by something more powerful than pain. "She's been shot," David told his father in a low voice as he cleaned the wound. "Looks like a small caliber, maybe a .22. Poacher's most likely." Harold's weathered face hardened. "And she's been running with these injuries while carrying that pup? Must have covered quite some distance." The mother dog didn't growl or snap as David worked. She simply kept her eyes fixed on the bundle in Emma's arms as if assuring herself her mission was complete. "Dad, can you bring that old dog bed from the shed? And some blankets? We need to get them both stabilized before we move them." While Harold gathered supplies, David continued his assessment. The dog's tags had been torn off, only a frayed piece of chain remained around her neck. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished, yet she'd clearly been giving what little she had to her puppy. Emma suddenly spoke, her voice so unexpected it made both men freeze. "Her name is Sergeant." David turned to his daughter, shock evident on his face. "What did you say, Em?" "Sergeant," Emma repeated, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the puppy's fur. "She wants us to call her Harold and David exchanged glances. Emma hadn't spoken a full sentence in nearly 3 months. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived 40 minutes later, her ancient pickup truck bouncing up the gravel driveway. She'd brought her mobile veterinary equipment, a rural necessity in these parts. "So these are our patients," she said briskly, professional demeanor firmly in place despite the awkwardness between her and David. She knelt beside the mother dog first, confirming David's initial assessment with practiced hands. "You're right about the gunshot wound, and she's severely dehydrated. The fact she's still alive is something of a miracle." When Sarah turned her attention to the puppy, her expression grew more concerned. "Malnutrition, possible pneumonia from exposure. He's maybe 8 weeks old, too young to be without his mother." She glanced at Emma, who hadn't relinquished her hold on the pup. "I need to examine him properly, Emma." To everyone's surprise, Emma carefully transferred the puppy to Sarah's hands, then immediately moved to sit beside the mother dog, placing her small hand on the shepherd's head. "I don't think we should move either of them yet," Sarah decided after her examination. "The mother—" "Sergeant," Emma interrupted softly. "Sergeant," Sarah corrected with a small smile, "is too unstable for transport. I'll set up an IV for fluids and antibiotics here. The puppy needs warmth, medication, and frequent feeding. I can show you how to tube feed him if necessary." Over the next 3 days, the Wilson cabin transformed into an impromptu veterinary ward. The dining table became a medical station, the living room a recovery area. David slept on the couch to be near the dogs, while Emma refused to leave the puppy's side, even sleeping on a pallet beside his basket. On the 3rd night, as moonlight filtered through the cabin windows, David awoke to find Emma sitting cross-legged between the 2 dogs, her hand on Sergeant's head. The mother dog's eyes were open, alert despite her weakness. "She's saying thank you," Emma whispered, not turning around. "She came a very long way to find us." David felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the certainty in his daughter's voice. In the half-light, with Emma's small silhouette between the 2 German shepherds, he was reminded painfully of Marie. His late wife had possessed that same unnerving ability to understand what animals needed, what they were trying to communicate. "I think she knew," Emma continued, still stroking Sergeant's head. "I think she knew we would help." For the first time in years, David found himself wondering if perhaps his daughter's autism wasn't just a condition that limited her, but one that opened doors to understanding that remained closed to others. On the fourth morning, as David prepared a nutrient-rich broth for the puppy, he noticed Emma sitting unusually still beside Sargent. The mother dog had improved slightly, enough to lift her head and accept small amounts of water, but remained critically weak. Sarah had warned them that her internal injuries were severe. The fact she'd survived this long was testament to her extraordinary will. "Emma, breakfast is ready," David called. When his daughter didn't respond, he approached, concerned. "Em, everything okay?" Emma was holding something in her small palm, examining it with intense concentration. She looked up at her father, blue eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't quite read. "Look," she said simply, extending her hand. In her palm lay a small metal object, tarnished, bent, but unmistakable to David, a military dog tag. His breath caught in his throat. "Where did you find this?" "It was inside her collar, the inside part," Emma demonstrated by running her finger along the interior fold of Sargent's worn leather collar. "It was stuck." David took the tag with trembling fingers. Military working dogs didn't typically wear standard identification tags like human soldiers. They had tattoos and microchips. This was a human soldier's ID tag. As he turned it over, the blood drained from his face. "Dad?" Harold appeared in the doorway, a stack of fresh towels in his arms. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." David couldn't speak. He simply handed the tag to his father. Harold squinted at the small metal rectangle. Then his eyes widened. "Mary Wilson, that—" "Mom's," Emma finished, her voice steady. "It's Mom's tag." The room fell into stunned silence. Marie had worn 2 tags during her service, as all soldiers did. One had been returned with her personal effects. The other, the one they buried with her, should have been placed in her casket. This isn't possible," David finally managed, his voice hoarse. "This can't be real." Harold examined the tag carefully. "It's authentic, David. Look at the stamping pattern, the service number. This belonged to Marie." "But how would it end up with this dog? Marie's unit was stationed in Afghanistan. This doesn't make any sense." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of distress Emma recognized all too well. Emma placed her hand on Sargent's head. "She brought it to us," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She's a messenger." David paced the small living room, military training battling with emotion. "We need to call Mike," he decided finally. "If there are poachers involved, or if this dog was stolen from a military facility, he needs to know." Ranger Mike Thompson arrived that afternoon, his Forest Service truck kicking up dust on the long driveway. He listened gravely as David explained their discovery, turning the dog tag over in his calloused hands. "I've been tracking a poaching operation for months," Mike admitted. "High-end clients hunting trophy animals illegally on federal land. But I never imagined they'd target military animals." He knelt beside Sargent, examining her without touching. "She's definitely military trained. Look at the way she's positioned, protecting her flank, keeping sightlines to all entry points. Classic guard dog posture." "But Mari's tag?" Harold pressed. "How do you explain that?" Mike shook his head. "I can't. Not yet. But I can make some calls, see if any military working dogs have been reported missing. What I do know is that finding her here with Mari's tag can't be a coincidence." As the adults talked, Emma remained by the puppy's side. The tiny German shepherd had begun to show signs of improvement. His breathing was stronger, and he had managed to swallow some diluted milk replacement. Emma had named him Ash, for his dark gray marking, she explained to her grandfather, and the name had stuck. That evening, after Mike left with promises to return with more information, Sarah arrived for her daily checkup. She was surprised by the tension in the house. "Did something happen?" she asked, preparing her stethoscope. "The puppy seems better, actually." David handed her the dog tag wordlessly. Sarah's professional composure slipped as she recognized the name. "Oh, my God," she whispered. David, is this? Martis, yes. His voice was tight with controlled emotion. Found it in the mother dog's collar. Sarah looked from the tag to Sargent, her medical mind clearly working through possibilities. Her unit trained dogs, didn't they? Could this be one of theirs? We're trying to figure out. But Marie's missing tag? That's the part I can't explain. As Sarah examined Sargent, her hands gentle but thorough, she stopped suddenly over the dog's shoulder blade. There's something here, under the skin. I can feel it when I press. She probed carefully. It's small, maybe the size of a grain of rice. A microchip, Harold suggested. Maybe, but it's not in the standard location. Let me get my scanner. Sarah retrieved a handheld scanner from her medical bag and passed it over the area. The device remained silent. Not a standard microchip, she concluded, but there's definitely something embedded there. I could remove it, but in her condition. No, David decided, not until she's stronger. Whatever it is, it's waited this long. That night Emma insisted on sleeping next to both dogs again. David brought her pillow and blanket down, creating a makeshift bed on the living room floor. As he tucked her in, Emma grabbed his hand, a rare initiation of physical contact that startled him. Dad, she said, her voice unusually clear, Mom sent them to us. David felt his throat tighten. We don't know that. There has to be some explanation for how Sargent got Marie's tag. Emma shook her head, frustrated by his lack of understanding. No. Mom always said dogs know things we don't, remember? She sent Sargent to find us, to bring us Ash. Unable to argue with his daughter's conviction and unwilling to take this moment of connection from her, David simply kissed her forehead. Get some sleep, sweetheart. We'll figure it all out tomorrow. As he climbed the stairs to his own bedroom later, David paused at Marie's photograph on the wall. His late wife smiled back at him, her arm around a military working dog, a Belgian Malinois, not a German shepherd, but the resemblance in posture, in the intelligent eyes, was striking. "What are you trying to tell us, Marie?" he whispered to the empty hallway. "What am I missing?" In the living room below, Emma slept peacefully for the first time in months, one hand on Sargent's paw, the other curled protectively around tiny Ash. 2 weeks after Sargent and Ash arrived at the Wilson cabin, the household had settled into a new routine. David had converted the mudroom into a recovery space for the dogs, with soft bedding, water bowls, and the medical supplies Sarah had left for their care. Sargent's wounds were healing slowly but steadily, though she still couldn't put weight on her injured leg. The puppy, on the other hand, was thriving. Ash had nearly doubled his weight, his coat was beginning to shine, and his playful personality emerged more each day. Most remarkable to David and Harold, however, was the change in Emma. The little girl who had barely spoken for months now chatted constantly to the dogs, and occasionally to the adults as well. She read books aloud to Ash, told him stories about her mother, and spent hours teaching him simple commands that the intelligent puppy eagerly attempted to follow. "It's like watching her come back to life," Harold remarked one evening as they observed Emma demonstrating to Ash how to sit properly. The puppy's rear end hovered uncertainly before plopping down, earning delighted praise from his young trainer. Marie would be... David's voice caught. She'd be so happy to see this. The mystery of Marie's dog tag remained unsolved. Ranger Mike had made inquiries through his military contacts, but had reached dead ends. No German shepherds matching Sargent's description had been reported missing from any nearby military installations, and Marie's unit had primarily used Belgian Malinois, not German shepherds. "There has to be a connection we're not seeing," David insisted during Mike's latest visit. "That dog tag wasn't a coincidence." "I agree," Mike said, accepting a cup of coffee from Harold. "But without Sargent's official military ID or medical records, we can't prove anything. And that thing Sarah felt under her skin, "We're waiting until she's stronger to investigate that," David interrupted. "Sarah says maybe another week." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. David opened it to find Linda Mercer, the director of Pinecrest Elementary School, standing on his porch. "Mr. Wilson," she began without preamble, "I've come to discuss Emma's extended absence. It's been 2 weeks since she's attended school." David sighed. In the chaos of caring for the dogs, he'd neglected to formally notify the school about Emma's homeschooling. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer, with everything happening here." "I've heard about the dogs," she interrupted, her tone making it clear what she thought of the situation. "The whole town is talking about it, but Emma's education can't take a back seat to pet rescue, Mr. Wilson." "They're not pets." Emma's voice came from behind David. She stood in the hallway, Ash cradled in her arms. "They're family." Mrs. Mercer's expression softened slightly at the sight of Emma actually speaking. "Hello, Emma. We've missed you at school." Her gaze returned to David, hardening again. "Mr. Wilson, there are concerns. An autistic child needs structure, professional support, and frankly there are questions about the safety of keeping an injured stray and her puppy in the home." "Who exactly has these concerns?" Harold joined them at the door, his normally friendly demeanor replaced by a protective stiffness. "Several parents have called the school, and Child Protective Services has been notified." David felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "CPS? Because we're helping injured animals?" "Because you've withdrawn an already vulnerable child from her support system to live in isolation with potentially dangerous animals." Mrs. Mercer straightened her jacket. "A caseworker will be visiting next week to assess the situation. I suggest you prepare accordingly." After she left, the three Wilsons stood in silence until Ash whimpered softly from Emma's arms. "They can't take them away," Emma said, her voice small but determined. "They belong with us." "No one's taking anyone," David assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Go check on Sargent, okay? Grandpa and I need to talk." Once Emma was out of earshot, Harold shook his head grimly. "This could get complicated, David. Linda Mercer sits on the town council with Roy Bennett." "The hunting guide, what does he have to do with anything?" "He's also a breeder, German Shepherd specifically, and he's been trying to buy that parcel of national forest land that borders our property, the same area where Mike's been investigating poaching." David processed this information slowly. "You think there's a connection?" "I think small towns have long memories and complicated politics," Harold replied. "And I think someone doesn't want us looking too closely at where these dogs came from." The next afternoon, as if summoned by their suspicions, Roy Bennett's mud-splattered truck rolled up their driveway. The man who emerged was tall and heavy-set, with a weathered face partially hidden behind a salt-and-pepper beard. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Wilson," he nodded at David, "heard you got yourself some strays." David positioned himself squarely in the doorway. "What can I do for you, Bennett?" "Well, now, I might be able to help you out. I'm missing a female shepherd, valuable breeding stock. Description matches the one you found. I'd be willing to take her and the pup off your hands, save you the trouble of nursing them back to health." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd even compensate you for your time." "These dogs aren't for sale," David replied flatly, "and if they were yours, why would a valuable breeding dog have a bullet wound and my late wife's military tag in her collar?" Bennett's expression flickered briefly before settling back into practiced amiability. "Military tag? Don't know nothing about that. As for the wound, she probably tangled with coyotes after she got loose. Been missing for months." "Do you have papers? Proof of ownership?" Harold had joined them, his tone deceptively casual. "Course I do. Back at my office. I can bring 'em by tomorrow." Bennett's gaze traveled past them into the house. The pup there?" David turned to see Emma standing in the hallway, Ash held protectively against her chest. Her eyes were wide with an emotion David recognized immediately: fear. "I think it's time for you to leave," David said quietly. "And don't come back without a sheriff and documented proof those dogs are yours." Bennett's friendly facade slipped. "You're making a mistake, Wilson. Those dogs are valuable property." "Goodbye, Mr. Bennett," Harold said firmly, stepping forward to close the door. As Bennett's truck disappeared down the driveway, David turned to Emma. "Did Ash get scared when that man came?" Emma shook her head, her expression unusually intense. "Not Ash. Sargent. She knows him. She's afraid." David and Harold exchanged glances. "How can you tell, sweetheart?" Harold asked gently. "She told me," Emma replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Not with words, but I know." She carried Ash back toward the mudroom. "She says he's a bad man. He hurts dogs." Later that evening, as Emma was getting ready for bed, David called Sarah Mitchell. "I need you to come examine Sargent tomorrow. Whatever's under her skin, we need to know what it is now." "Her condition is still fragile, David," Sarah cautioned. "Any procedure carries risks. Bennett came by today claiming she belongs to him. Something's not right, Sarah. If there's evidence that could protect her, we need it." Sarah arrived early the next morning with her medical kit and a grim expression. "I'll do this under one condition. If removing whatever's under her skin causes complications, you let me take her to my clinic immediately." "Agreed," David said, though the thought of Sargent leaving their protection made him uneasy. "I'd like to help," Emma announced, appearing in the doorway with Ash at her heels. The puppy had become her shadow, following her everywhere with devoted attention. Sarah smiled kindly. "Actually, Emma, you can help by keeping Ash occupied in another room. This procedure might upset him." Emma seemed about to protest, but after a moment's consideration, she nodded. "Come on, Ash," she called, leading the reluctant puppy toward the kitchen. "Let's make breakfast." With Emma gone, Sarah prepared her instruments. "I'll give her a local anesthetic, but she'll be awake. David, you'll need to hold her still." Sargent watched the preparations calmly, her intelligent eyes following each movement. When David knelt beside her, murmuring reassurances, she laid her head on his knee in a gesture of trust that brought an unexpected lump to his throat. The procedure took less than 10 minutes. Sarah's skilled hands made a small incision, probed gently, and extracted a tiny object no larger than a grain of rice. "What is it?" Harold asked, leaning closer. Sarah placed the object on a clean gauze pad. "It's not a standard identification microchip. It looks more like a tracking device." David stared at the tiny cylinder. "Someone was tracking her? Why?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, cleaning and closing the small wound. "But I'm guessing Roy Bennett might have some answers." As if on cue, the sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention. David moved to the window, tensing when he recognized Bennett's truck, followed by a sheriff's patrol car. "They're here," he said grimly. "Dad, get that device somewhere safe. Sarah, stay with Sargent." Harold quickly pocketed the tiny tracker while David stepped outside to meet their visitors. Sheriff Tom Grantham, a man David knew only in passing, stood beside Bennett, who was clutching a folder of papers. "Mr. Wilson," the sheriff began formally, "Mr. Bennett here has filed a report claiming you're in possession of his property, specifically a female German shepherd and her puppy. He has documentation." He gestured to the folder. "We'd like to verify his claim." "Of course," David replied calmly. "But you should know that the dog in question arrived here severely injured, with a bullet wound consistent with a small caliber hunting rifle. She also had my late wife's military identification tag embedded in her collar, and we've just removed what appears to be an unauthorized tracking device from under her skin." The sheriff's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "A tracking device?" "That's ridiculous," Bennett interjected. "Wilson's making up stories to keep valuable breeding stock." Sheriff, David continued steadily, I believe these dogs are connected to the poaching operation Ranger Thompson has been investigating, and I believe Mr. Bennett knows exactly how my wife's military tag ended up with this dog. The standoff might have continued, but at that moment Emma's voice rang out from the doorway. She doesn't belong to him. She was trying to get away from him. All heads turned to see the small girl standing resolutely in the entrance, Ash now at her feet rather than in her arms. The puppy, sensing the tension, pressed against Emma's legs, but faced the strangers with alert attention. "Emma, go back inside," David said gently. "No." Emma's voice was stronger than David had heard it in years. She took a step forward, blue eyes locked defiantly on Bennett. "Sergeant knows what you did. You hurt dogs. You make them fight. You use them for hunting when it's not allowed." Bennett's face darkened. "Control your kid, Wilson." The sheriff raised a hand, silencing him. "Young lady, those are serious accusations. How would you know such things?" Emma knelt to wrap an arm around Ash, who had begun to tremble. "Sergeant showed me, not with words, but I know." "Sheriff," Bennett growled, "I've got papers right here proving ownership. Are you going to enforce the law or listen to fairy tales from a—" "Choose your next words very carefully, Bennett," David interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. The tension was broken by the arrival of Ranger Mike's Forest Service truck. He emerged looking unusually official in his full uniform. "Sheriff," he nodded, "glad I caught you. I've got something you need to see." He approached, carrying a tablet. "We just got the results back from the State Wildlife Lab, blood samples from 3 illegally hunted elk on federal land. And, Mr. Bennett, you'll be interested to know that hair samples collected at the same sites match a specific bloodline of German Shepherd. Your bloodline, according to kennel registration records." Bennett's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "That doesn't prove anything." "Maybe not by itself," Mike agreed, "but combined with satellite tracking data showing your hunting parties in closed areas on those exact dates and witness statements from 3 former clients who've decided to cooperate rather than face charges." He let the implication hang in the air. The sheriff studied Bennett with new suspicion. "Mr. Bennett, I think we need to continue this conversation at my office." He turned to David. "The ownership claim is on hold pending investigation. The dogs can remain here for now." As the sheriff escorted a protesting Bennett toward the patrol car, Mike approached David with a grim smile. "That tracking device you mentioned, I'd like to see it. It might be the final piece we need to connect Bennett to an interstate poaching network we've been trying to crack for years." Once the vehicles had departed, the tension in the Wilson household gave way to cautious relief. Sarah completed her treatment of Sergeant, while Harold explained what they'd learned to Emma in age-appropriate terms. The little girl listened solemnly, then returned to the mudroom to sit with both dogs. "She's processing," Harold explained to Sarah. "Emma understands more than she can express sometimes." Sarah nodded, packing her medical supplies. "The bond she has with these dogs is remarkable, especially considering her autism." "It's not despite her autism," David corrected gently. "I'm beginning to think it's because of it. Marie always said Emma sees things differently. Not less, just differently." That evening, after Sarah and Mike had gone with promises to return the next day, David found Emma asleep between the 2 German shepherds. Sergeant had positioned herself protectively at the girl's back while Ash was curled against her chest. The scene brought an unexpected surge of emotion, grief mingled with something that felt suspiciously like hope. Harold appeared beside him, voice soft with wonder. "In all my years working with animals, I've never seen anything quite like this. It's as if—" "As if what?" David prompted when his father trailed off. "As if they were meant to find each other." Harold placed a weathered hand on his son's shoulder. "Marie would be proud, you know. Not just of Emma, but of you too. You trusted your daughter's instincts when everyone else dismissed them. David watched his sleeping child, peaceful for the first time in years. Bennett will fight this. And CPS is still coming to evaluate us. "Let them come," Harold said with quiet confidence. "Some connections transcend paperwork and protocols. Anyone who sees Emma with these dogs will understand that." As if hearing her name, Emma stirred slightly. Her hand moved to rest on Sargent's paw, a small gesture of such natural affection that David felt his doubts recede. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them together, not just father, daughter, and grandfather, but their newly expanded family, bound by something deeper than blood or circumstance. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance a wild chorus of coyotes began their nightly song. Inside the Wilson cabin, Sargent lifted her head alertly at the sound, then settled back against Emma with a contented sigh. She was home. The end of their first month with Sargent and Ash brought unexpected challenges. Emma had been thriving, speaking more, smiling often, even agreeing to video calls with her teacher to continue some schoolwork from home. Sargent's wounds had nearly healed, and she had begun taking short walks around the property, always alert, always watching the forest line as if expecting danger to emerge at any moment. Ash had blossomed into an energetic puppy whose antics brought laughter to the cabin daily. But as the weather shifted toward summer, dark clouds gathered both literally and figuratively over the Wilson family. The first signs of trouble came when Sargent refused her breakfast one morning. The normally disciplined dog sniffed at the bowl David offered, then turned away, moving stiffly to her bed in the corner of the mudroom. "That's not like her," Harold remarked, watching with concern. "She hasn't missed a meal since that first week." David knelt beside the German shepherd, running experienced hands along her body. She permitted his examination, but whined softly when he touched her abdomen. "She's hot," he said, feeling her ears. "And there's swelling here near the old wound site." He called Sarah immediately. The veterinarian arrived within the hour, her face grim as she examined Sargent. "The infection's back," she confirmed. "Worse than before. The bullet fragments I was worried about have shifted, and there's significant internal inflammation." She looked up at David, her professional demeanor barely masking her concern. "She needs surgery, David. Real surgery, not just the field treatment I can provide here." "Whatever it takes," David said without hesitation. "When can you do it?" Sarah shook her head. "That's the problem. My clinic isn't equipped for this level of surgery. She needs a veterinary surgical center. The closest one is in Bristol, almost 3 hours from here." "Then we'll go to Bristol," David stated firmly. "It's not that simple." Sarah lowered her voice, glancing toward Emma, who was in the kitchen with Ash. "The surgery is expensive, specialized. We're talking thousands of dollars, and," she hesitated, "there's a significant risk. Her system is already compromised from the prolonged infection and malnutrition." Before David could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, Ash perched in her arms like a furry sentinel. "Sargent's really sick, isn't she?" The directness of her question startled the adults. Sarah nodded, never one to sugarcoat the truth, even for children. "Yes, Emma. She's very sick. She needs an operation to get better." "Then we have to take her," Emma said simply, as if the matter were settled. "Dad still has Mom's special fund, the one for emergencies." David felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't realized Emma knew about the small insurance payout from Marie's death that he'd been saving for Emma's future education. But of course she would. Emma missed little, even when she seemed disconnected from conversations around her. "We'll figure something out," he promised, meeting his daughter's determined gaze. "Sarah, can you make the arrangements? We can leave today." Sarah nodded, already reaching for her phone. "I'll call Dr. Brennan at Metro Animal Surgical. If we leave within the hour, we can get there before they close their intake." The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of activity. Harold packed an overnight bag for David and Emma, while David carefully moved Sargent to the back of his SUV, creating a makeshift bed with blankets and pillows. Emma insisted on bringing Ash, refusing to be separated from either dog. Grandpa will take good care of him, David tried to reason. No, Emma's voice was firm. Ash needs to be there. Sargent will be scared without him. In the end, they compromised. Ash would come to Bristol, but would stay in a pet-friendly hotel with Emma while Sargent underwent surgery. Harold would remain at the cabin in case Roy Bennett or his allies attempted anything in their absence. As they prepared to leave, Harold pressed a weathered envelope into David's hand. "Take this," he said quietly. "Your mother and I saved it for something important. This qualifies." David recognized his parents' emergency cash fund, the one they'd maintained for decades, never touching it despite financial hardships. "Dad, I can't." "Yes, you can," Harold interrupted. "Marie would want this. So would your mother." The drive to Bristol was tense and silent. In the back seat, Emma sat beside Sargent's makeshift bed, one hand constantly touching the ailing dog, while Ash curled in her lap, unusually subdued as if sensing the gravity of the situation. Sarah had followed in her own vehicle, maintaining phone contact with the surgical center. 2 hours into the journey, as they navigated winding mountain roads, the sky opened. Rain fell in blinding sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. David slowed the SUV, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Dad," Emma's voice came from the back seat, small with worry. "Sargent's breathing funny." David glanced back quickly, fear spiking when he saw Sargent's labored respiration and the way her eyes had glazed over. "Sarah," he spoke urgently into the phone's speaker, "something's wrong. She's deteriorating." "How far are we from Bristol?" Sarah's voice crackled through the connection. "At least 40 minutes in this weather." "There's a small veterinary clinic in Cedar Grove," Sarah said after a moment's thought. "It's about 10 minutes ahead, just off Route 16. Dr. Jenkins isn't a surgical specialist, but he might be able to stabilize her." David made the decision instantly. "Text me the address." The rural clinic was little more than a converted house with a small illuminated sign that was barely visible through the downpour. David pulled into the gravel parking lot and was out of the car before the engine fully stopped, rushing through the rain to the front door. It was locked. He pounded desperately, relief washing over him when a light flicked on inside. An elderly man in a sweater and reading glasses opened the door, surprise evident on his weathered face. "We're closed, but—" The man stopped when he took in David's rain-soaked desperation. "What's happened?" "My dog," David managed. "She's critically ill, internal infection from a gunshot wound. Dr. Mitchell from Pinecrest sent us." The man, presumably Dr. Jenkins, nodded briskly. "Bring her in through the side door. It's closer to the exam room." Between them, David and the veterinarian carried Sargent's limp form into the small clinic. Emma followed with Ash clutched to her chest, rain plastering her blonde hair to her pale face. Dr. Jenkins worked with quiet efficiency, inserting an IV and administering medications while David explained Sargent's history. "This is beyond my usual practice," the elderly vet admitted, listening to Sargent's chest with a stethoscope. "But I understand the Bristol clinic is still an hour away in this storm." He straightened, decision made. "I'll do what I can to stabilize her. The infection's causing septic shock. That's why she's crashed so suddenly." Emma stood in the corner, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched Sargent's labored breathing. Ash whimpered softly in her arms, struggling to get down, to reach his mother. "Can she—" Emma's voice broke. "Can she hear us?" Dr. Jenkins' expression softened as he turned to the child. "I believe she can, young lady. Why don't you talk to her while I prepare these medications? Sometimes a familiar voice is the best medicine." Emma approached tentatively, setting Ash down beside his mother on the examination table. The puppy immediately curled against Sargent's neck, his small body trembling. Emma placed one hand on Sargent's head, the other on Ash. "You have to stay," she whispered fiercely. "You found us for a reason. You brought Ash to us. You can't go yet. Her voice dropped even lower, so that David could barely hear her next words. "Mom sent you. I know she did. Please, don't leave us, too." Outside, lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The clinic's lights flickered ominously, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the strobing flashes of the storm. "Generators should kick in," Dr. Jenkins muttered, fumbling for a flashlight. But before the backup power could engage, something extraordinary happened. In the brief electrical blue illumination from another lightning strike, David saw Sargent's eyes open. The German shepherd lifted her head weakly, nose pressed to Emma's tear-streaked face, as if gathering strength from the child. "Dad," Emma cried, "she's awake." The generator hummed to life, emergency lights casting the room in a soft glow. Dr. Jenkins returned to Sargent's side, amazement evident as he checked her vitals. "Her heart rate stabilizing," he confirmed. "I don't know how, but she's fighting back." For the next 2 hours they maintained a vigil beside Sargent. The storm raged outside, making further travel impossible, but inside the small clinic a different kind of force seemed to be at work. Sargent's condition improved steadily under Dr. Jenkins' care and Emma's unwavering attention. Sarah arrived just as the rain began to slacken, soaked and worried. She conferred with Dr. Jenkins in low tones, reviewing his treatment and Sargent's response. "It's remarkable," Sarah admitted to David. "The medications he administered wouldn't normally produce such a dramatic improvement. It's almost as if—" "As if what?" David prompted when she trailed off. Sarah shook her head, as if she simply refused to give up. She watched Emma, who had fallen asleep on a blanket on the floor, one arm around Ash, the other stretched up to maintain contact with Sargent on the examination table. "That connection between your daughter and these dogs, it's something special, David. Something I can't explain medically." "Marie used to say that love was the most powerful medicine," David replied softly. "I always thought it was just a pretty sentiment." By midnight the storm had passed. Sargent had stabilized enough for Dr. Jenkins to feel comfortable releasing her to David's care, with instructions to proceed to Bristol in the morning for the still necessary surgery. "She's not out of danger," he cautioned as he helped them settle Sargent back into the SUV, "but she's shown remarkable resilience. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." They found a pet-friendly motel a few miles down the road. The elderly woman at the reception desk took one look at their bedraggled group. Exhausted man, sleeping child carried in his arms, puppy tucked in her jacket, and a large, clearly ill German shepherd being gently guided toward the room, and silently upgraded them to a larger ground-floor suite at no extra charge. Inside the room, David created another makeshift bed for Sargent near the heater, administered the medications Dr. Jenkins had provided, and finally allowed himself to sink into a chair, the adrenaline of the past hours giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. Emma, who had woken during the transfer to the motel, sat cross-legged beside Sargent, Ash nestled in her lap. Sargent's eyes remained fixed on the child's face, an expression of such devotion that it brought a lump to David's throat. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, her voice clear in the quiet room, "I know why Sargent had Mom's tag." David straightened, fatigue momentarily forgotten. "What do you mean, Emma?" "Mom trained her, before." Emma stroked Ash's ears absently. "Not for the Army. For me. She was going to be my dog when she finished training. Mom told me about her in her letters." David stared at his daughter, memories rushing back. Marie had indeed mentioned a special project in her final letters home. A service dog being trained specifically for Emma. The project had been in its early stages when Marie was killed, and in his grief, David had forgotten about it entirely. "How do you remember that, Emma? You were so young when Mom died." Emma shrugged, the gesture both childlike and strangely mature. "I remember everything Mom told me. I just couldn't talk about it. It hurt too much." David moved to sit beside his daughter, carefully putting an arm around her small shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? About remembering Sargent?" "I wasn't sure at first," Emma admitted, "but then I saw the tag and I started remembering. Mom said she was special, that she'd help me when things got too loud or scary. She said Sargent would always find her way to me, no matter what." David's eyes filled with tears as the pieces fell into place. Marie's last gift to their daughter had somehow, against all odds, fulfilled its purpose, not in the way they had planned, but in a way that perhaps meant even more. Outside the motel window, the clouds parted, revealing a sky filled with stars. Inside, Sargent sighed deeply, finally relaxing into true sleep now that her family was safely gathered around her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: surgery, recovery, the ongoing battle with those who sought to claim her. But tonight, in this moment, something long broken had begun to heal. Sargent's surgery at the Bristol Veterinary Surgical Center was successful, but the road to recovery proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Brennan, a stern-faced woman with 3 decades of experience, had removed the remaining bullet fragments and repaired the internal damage with meticulous precision. She'd been cautiously optimistic when speaking to David afterward. "She's strong," the surgeon had said, reviewing post-separative notes. "Remarkably so, given what she's been through. But recovery will take time, and there are no guarantees. The septic infection did considerable damage." For 3 days they had remained in Bristol. Emma refused to leave the veterinary center's waiting room during visiting hours, her small form curled in uncomfortable plastic chairs. Ash quietly settled beside her as if understanding the need for patience. When they were permitted brief visits with Sargent, Emma would sit beside the recovering dog, whispering encouragements that no one else could hear. On the 4th day, Dr. Brennan finally cleared Sargent for discharge with a lengthy list of medications, care instructions, and follow-up appointments. The drive home was considerably less fraught than their journey to Bristol had been, but a different kind of tension filled the car. The awareness that while one battle had been won, the war was far from over. They arrived at the cabin to find Harold waiting anxiously on the porch. His relief at seeing Sargent alive was palpable, but it was quickly overshadowed by the news he shared. "Child Protective Services called yesterday," he told David quietly as they carefully transferred Sargent to her bed inside. "They've scheduled a home visit for tomorrow morning. And that's not all. Bennett's lawyer has filed for an emergency hearing regarding ownership of the dogs. It's set for next week." David absorbed this information with grim resignation. We knew they wouldn't give up easily. "There's something else," Harold hesitated. "Mike Thompson stopped by. The tracking device they found on Sargent, it matches others recovered from Bennett's property during their investigation. They're building a strong case against him for illegal hunting activities, but what? The prosecutor is hesitant to include the dogs in the case, says it complicates things, especially with the ownership dispute pending." David glanced toward the mudroom where Emma was settling Sargent into her bed, Ash hovering protectively nearby. "We'll fight this, Dad, every step of the way." But the fight proved harder than anticipated. The CPS caseworker who arrived the next morning, a young woman named Jessica Rivera with a clipboard and carefully neutral expression, spent 2 hours inspecting the cabin, interviewing David and Harold, and observing Emma's interactions with both dogs. Though she remained professionally detached, her concern was evident when she reviewed Emma's school records and noted the significant gap in formal education. "Mr. Wilson," she said as she prepared to leave, "I understand your daughter has formed an attachment to these animals, but my job is to ensure her developmental needs are being met. An autistic child requires specialized support, educational, social, therapeutic. I'm not seeing evidence of that here." "With respect, Ms. Rivera," David countered, struggling to keep his voice even, "Emma has made more progress in the months since these dogs arrived than in the 2 years before. She's speaking again, she's engaging. Ask her teacher about the video sessions they've been having. A month of improvement doesn't outweigh years of concern, Rivera replied. And there's the matter of safety. These are not typical pets, Mr. Wilson. One is recovering from major surgery after a gunshot wound with an unknown history. The ownership dispute raises additional questions. They're not just pets. Emma's voice came from the hallway, startling both adults. She stood there holding Ash, her expression unusually fierce for an 8-year-old. Sargent was my mom's last gift to me. She was training her for me before she died. Rivera's professional facade softened slightly. Emma, I understand you feel that way. It's not a feeling, it's true. Emma's grip on Ash tightened protectively. Ask anyone who worked with my mom. Sargent was being trained as my service dog. The caseworker glanced at David, who nodded confirmation. Marie mentioned it in her letters. We've been trying to verify through her old unit, but military bureaucracy moves slowly. Rivera made a final note on her clipboard. I'll include that in my report, but I want to be clear. My recommendation will likely involve increased structure and professional support for Emma. We can discuss options that would allow the dogs to remain in the home, but changes will need to be made. After she left, David found Emma sitting beside Sargent's bed, her face buried in Ash's fur. The puppy licked away her tears with dedicated attention. They're going to take them away, Emma said without looking up, her voice muffled. No, they're not, David promised, crouching beside her. We just need to make some adjustments, maybe get you some more structured therapy, return to school part-time. He gently turned her face toward his. We'll figure it out, Em, together. For a moment it seemed his reassurance had worked. Emma nodded and even managed a small smile. But that night, the true weight of the situation manifested in unexpected ways. David awoke to Ash's frantic barking, not his usual playful yips, but urgent, alarmed sounds. He rushed to Emma's room, finding her bed empty, then followed the barking to the mudroom. Emma was curled beside Sargent on the dog's bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Sargent, despite her weakened state, had positioned herself partially over the child in a protective posture, while Ash continued his desperate barking, circling them both. Emma! David knelt beside them, heart racing. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Emma couldn't speak through her sobs. Harold appeared in the doorway, alarmed by the commotion. She's having a meltdown, he said, recognizing the signs from Emma's earlier years. It's been building since the caseworker left. They dealt with Emma's autism meltdowns before, the overwhelming emotional responses that came when she couldn't process or express the intensity of her feelings. But this one seemed different, deeper somehow. It took nearly an hour to calm her enough to speak coherently. They'll take Sargent and Ash, she finally managed between hiccuping sobs. Just like they took Mom. Everyone leaves. David felt his heart breaking at the raw fear in his daughter's voice. Mom didn't leave by choice, Emma. She would have stayed with us forever if she could have. Sargent will leave, too, Emma insisted, clinging to the German shepherd. She's sick again, I can tell. David's gaze snapped to Sargent, realizing with dawning horror that Emma's intuition was correct. The dog's breathing had become labored again, and she seemed unusually lethargic, even accounting for her recent surgery. A frantic call to the emergency veterinary service confirmed their fears. Sargent was showing signs of post-surgical complications. They were advised to monitor her closely and bring her in immediately if her condition worsened. Through the long night that followed, Emma refused to leave Sargent's side. She diligently helped David administer medication, check temperature, and offer small amounts of water, all while maintaining a constant stream of whispered encouragement to the ailing dog. Ash remained equally vigilant, curled against his mother's side, occasionally whimpering softly. By morning, Sargent's condition had stabilized somewhat, but she still refused food. Her gaze followed Emma constantly, as if drawing strength from the child's presence. Sarah Mitchell arrived early, having driven straight to the cabin after receiving David's overnight message. "It's not uncommon for complications after such extensive surgery," she explained after examining Sargent. "The concerning part is her refusal to eat. If that continues, she'll weaken rapidly." "What can we do?" David asked, watching as Emma attempted once again to coax Sargent into taking a small piece of chicken from her palm. Sarah sighed, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine concern. "Medically, we're doing everything possible. The rest," she gestured toward Emma and Sargent. "Sometimes it comes down to will, the desire to fight, to stay." Throughout that day and the next, Sargent's condition continued to decline, despite their best efforts. Emma barely left her side, missing meals herself, sleeping in short bursts curled against the dog's weakening form. David and Harold took turns sitting with him, their own worry mounting as Sargent grew visibly weaker. On the third morning, Sarah arrived with Dr. Brennan, who had driven from Bristol at Sarah's urgent request. The surgical specialist's examination was thorough, but her conclusion grim. "The infection has returned, more resistant this time," she explained quietly to David in the kitchen, away from Emma's hearing. "We could attempt another surgery, but in her weakened state—" "She wouldn't survive it," David finished, understanding the unspoken assessment. Dr. Brennan nodded reluctantly. "There's another option. We can make her comfortable, manage the pain, but—" She left the implication hanging. "You're talking about euthanasia," Harold said flatly. "It would be the kindest choice," Dr. Brennan confirmed. "She's suffering, and the prognosis is poor." David felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath him. "I need to talk to Emma." Finding the words to explain to an already traumatized 8-year-old that her beloved dog might need to be put to sleep was perhaps the hardest thing David had ever done. Emma listened with unnatural stillness, her blue eyes wide and unblinking. "No," she said when he finished. "Not a cry, not a shout, just a simple, flat refusal. Sargent isn't ready to go. She still has work to do." "Emma, sweetheart," Harold tried gently, "sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to let them go when they're suffering." "She's not suffering because she's sick," Emma insisted with a conviction that startled all of them. "She's suffering because she's worried about Ash. About me. She thinks we won't be okay without her." The adults exchanged concerned glances, uncertain how to respond to Emma's projection of such complex emotions onto the dog, but before anyone could formulate a response, Emma had already returned to Sargent's side, Ash following close behind. Through the window, David watched his daughter lean close to the weakened German shepherd, her lips moving in what appeared to be a solemn promise. Whatever she said, Sargent's ears perked slightly, the first responsive movement they'd seen in hours. "I don't know what to do," David admitted to his father, voice breaking. "If we lose Sargent now, after everything, I don't think Emma will recover." Harold placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. "Trust your daughter, David. She understands Sargent in ways we don't." He gazed out at Emma, still whispering intently to the ailing dog. "Maury always said Emma had a gift. Maybe it's time we truly believed that." The evening brought a tense quiet to the Wilson cabin. Dr. Brennan had reluctantly agreed to give Sargent one more night before making the final decision about euthanasia, leaving additional pain medication and instructions for comfort care. Sarah had stayed, setting up a makeshift monitoring station in the mudroom, checking Sargent's vitals hourly and documenting every subtle change. Emma refused dinner, refused bed, refused comfort. She simply sat beside Sargent, one hand on the dog's chest to feel each labored breath, the other absently stroking Ash, who maintained his own vigil. The puppy had grown subdued, as if sensing the gravity of the situation, his usual playfulness replaced by a solemn attentiveness that seemed far beyond his few months of life. Shortly after midnight, when the house had fallen into uneasy silence, David found himself unable to sleep. He made his way quietly downstairs, pausing at the entrance to the mudroom. The scene before him broke his heart anew. Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled against Sargent's side, one arm draped protectively over the dog. Sarah dozed in the armchair they'd moved in for her, clipboard still in her lap. Only Ash was awake, his intelligent eyes meeting David's in the dim light. The puppy rose carefully, extracting himself from Emma's loose embrace without waking her. He padded silently to David, not with his usual exuberance, but with deliberate purpose. He nudged David's hand once, then turned back toward Emma and Sargent, looking over his shoulder as if expecting David to follow. Puzzled, David did. Ash led him to Sargent's side, then pawed gently at the dog bed, not at the portion where Emma and Sargent lay, but at a corner tucked against the wall. He pawed again, more insistently, when David didn't immediately understand. "What is it, boy?" David whispered, kneeling beside the puppy. Ash whined softly, continuing to dig at the corner of the bed. David carefully lifted the edge of the thick cushion, finding nothing unusual, but Ash wasn't satisfied. He pushed his muzzle further under the bed itself, toward the baseboard of the wall. David slid his hand along the floor where Ash indicated, surprised when his fingers met something small and hard. He extracted it carefully, a tiny metal object that glinted dully in the low light. It was a USB drive, weathered and scratched, but intact, sealed inside a small waterproof container. "What on earth?" he murmured, turning it over in his palm. The movement woke Sarah, who straightened in the chair with a soft gasp. "David, is something wrong? Is she—" "No change," he assured her quickly, showing her what he'd found. "Ash just led me to this. It was hidden under Sargent's bed, against the wall." Sarah took the USB drive, examining it with bleary confusion. "How would this get there? We just brought this bed in a few weeks ago." A thought struck David. "Not we. Emma. Remember? She insisted on arranging Sargent's recovery space herself." He glanced at his sleeping daughter. "She must have hidden it there. But why? And where did she get it?" David had no answer. He pocketed the drive, promising himself he'd speak with Emma in the morning. For now he simply adjusted the blanket over his daughter's shoulders and returned to his interrupted vigil. Morning brought no improvement in Sargent's condition. If anything, she seemed weaker, her once alert eyes now dull and unfocused. Dr. Brennan returned, her examination confirming what they already feared. Time was running out. "I can give her until this afternoon," she told David gently, "but prolonging things beyond that would be cruel." David nodded, throat too tight for words. He needed to tell Emma, to prepare her somehow, but his daughter had disappeared upstairs after Sargent's morning medications, taking Ash with her. He found her in her bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Marie's old military footlocker open before her. The puppy sat attentively at her side. "Emma," David approached carefully, recognizing the box that contained the few personal items returned after Marie's death, items Emma had never shown interest in examining before. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Emma looked up, her expression unnervingly calm. "Looking for Mom's other letters. The secret ones." David felt a chill run through him. "Secret letters?" "The ones about Sargent, about the mission," Emma continued, rifling through the contents of the locker with methodical precision, removing each item, examining it, and setting it aside. "Mom said there would be proof if we needed it." David knelt beside his daughter, gently stilling her hands. "Emma, what are you talking about? What mission?" For a moment Emma seemed frustrated by his failure to understand, but then her expression cleared, as if coming to a decision. "I found the USB drive in Sargent's collar, the inside part, like Mom's tag." David stared at her, pieces beginning to click into place. "You found the drive when Sargent first arrived? You've had it all this time?" Emma nodded. "I hid it under her bed. Mom's letter said to keep it safe until we found all the pieces." "What letter, Emma?" David asked, struggling to keep his voice gentle despite the urgency building within him. When did Mom tell you this?" Instead of answering, Emma reached deeper into the footlocker, removing the false bottom David hadn't known existed. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope, Marie's handwriting immediately recognizable on the front. For Emma, when the dogs come home. With shaking hands, David opened the envelope, careful not to tear what might be his wife's final message to their daughter. Inside was a single page, written in Marie's distinctive script. "My darling Emma, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, but Sargent has found you as I trained her to do. She carries important information that could put you in danger. Trust no one except your father and grandfather. When all three pieces are united, the drive, the tag, and what's hidden in the pup's tracking device, the truth will be clear. I'm sorry for the secrets. Everything I did was to protect you and to stop bad people from using animals to hurt others. Sargent will guard you as I would have. She knows who to trust. All my love forever and always." David read the letter twice, his mind racing. "Emma, why didn't you show me this before? The letter says when the dogs come home. They weren't home until now." Emma's logic was straightforward, unarguable in its childlike certainty. "And we didn't have all three pieces until Dr. Sarah took out the tracker from Sargent." David remembered the tiny tracking device they'd removed from Sargent's shoulder, the one Mike had taken as evidence against Bennett. "The third piece is in the tracking device," he murmured, reaching for his phone. "We need to call Mike. Right now." While he made the call, Emma returned to organizing the items from the footlocker, seemingly untroubled by the urgency around her. Ash remained by her side, occasionally nudging specific items with his nose, as if helping her search. Mike arrived within the hour, the seized tracking device sealed in an evidence bag. He listened gravely as David explained Emma's revelation, examining Marie's letter with a forest ranger's practical skepticism and a friend's growing concern. "This is extraordinary," he admitted finally, "but it aligns with what we've been piecing together about Bennett's operation. He wasn't just poaching. He was training dogs to assist in illegal hunts of endangered species, using military training techniques. If Marie discovered this, she might have gathered evidence," David finished, the terrible possibility taking shape. "Evidence that got her killed." Mike nodded grimly. "The kind of people involved in international wildlife trafficking don't hesitate to eliminate threats. But they'd want the evidence destroyed, too." "So what's on these devices?" David asked, gesturing to the USB drive and tracking chip. "And how do they connect to Marie's dog tag?" "Let's find out," Mike replied, producing a laptop from his truck. "The tag first." Using precision tools, Mike carefully prized open the military ID tag they'd found in Sargent's collar weeks earlier. Inside was a microchip similar to those used in credit cards, a storage device disguised as a standard identification tag. "Ingenious," Mike murmured appreciatively. "Your wife knew what she was doing." The USB drive contained encrypted files that Mike's Forestry Service laptop couldn't open, but the chip from inside the dog tag functioned as an authentication key, unlocking a portion of the data. What they found confirmed their growing suspicions. Detailed records of Bennett's illegal hunting operation, including client lists featuring wealthy international hunters, dates, locations, and banking information. "This is enough to shut them down completely," Mike said, scanning the documents. "But there's still more data locked behind additional encryption. We need what's in that tracking device." The third component proved more challenging. The tiny tracker had been damaged, both by its time beneath Sargent's skin and by the extraction process. Mike worked carefully, connecting it to specialized equipment from his truck, while David returned to the mudroom to check on Sargent and update Sarah. What he found stopped him cold in the doorway. Sargent was sitting up, weakly, shakily, but upright, with Emma kneeling before her, forehead pressed to the dog's muzzle in what looked almost like communion. Ash circled them both, his tail wagging with cautious hope. "She's responding," Sarah whispered from the chair, disbelief evident in her voice. "Her fever's broken. I can't explain it, but she's fighting again." David watched as Emma whispered something to Sargent, and the dog responded with the faintest tap of her tail against the bed. The moment felt sacred somehow, a communication beyond his understanding. "David," Mike's urgent call broke the spell. "You need to see this, now." In the living room, Mike had managed to extract data from the damaged tracking device. On the screen were photographs, dozens of them, showing Bennett with various international clients standing over illegal kills. More damning were images of training facilities where dogs, including German Shepherds that looked remarkably like Sargent, were being conditioned using cruel methods. "Marie documented everything," Mike said, scrolling through the evidence. Names, dates, locations. Bennett wasn't just poaching himself. He was running a high-end illegal hunting operation across multiple states, using trained dogs to track endangered species. "And Marie discovered this how?" David asked, struggling to reconcile this new information with what he'd known of his wife's military work. Mike pointed to a folder labeled Operation Guardian. Inside were official-looking documents detailing a joint military wildlife conservation initiative, one that Marie had apparently been part of. "She was assigned to investigate the disappearance of military-trained dogs," Mike explained, scanning the files. "Dogs like Sargent. The military was losing track of working dogs after discharge. Dogs with specialized training were thousands to the right buyers." A new document appeared on screen. A breeding program registry with Sargent's photograph and details. Next to it was a picture of a litter of puppies, one of which was unmistakably Ash. She was documenting Bennett's entire operation, David realized. Not just the poaching, but the dog trafficking too, and ensuring the evidence would survive even if she didn't, Mike added soberly. These three pieces, separated and hidden, each useless without the others. Your wife was brilliant, David. A commotion from the mudroom interrupted them, Sarah calling David's name with alarmed urgency. They rushed back to find Emma standing at the open back door, Ash at her feet, both of them looking out into the woods with intense focus. "She just got up and walked out," Sarah explained, gesturing toward the yard where Sargent was slowly, unsteadily making her way toward the tree line. "I couldn't stop her, and Emma insisted we shouldn't try." "She heard something," Emma said, without turning around. "Someone's coming." No sooner had the words left her mouth than the sound of vehicles approaching from the front of the cabin reached them. Not the familiar rumble of Harold's truck returning from town, but the aggressive growl of multiple engines moving too fast up their private drive. Mike's hand went instinctively to his service weapon. "Bennett," he said grimly. "He must have been tipped off about the evidence." David made a split-second decision. "Sarah, take Emma and the dogs out the back. Get to the old hunter's blind in the east woods. Emma knows where. Stay there until I come for you, until you hear from Sheriff Grantham directly." "Dad, no," Emma protested, turning to him with fear in her eyes. "Sargent's too weak. She can't run." "Then carry her," David insisted, already moving toward the front of the cabin where they could now hear car doors slamming. "Go, now." As Sarah gathered emergency supplies, David knelt before his daughter, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Emma, listen to me. What your mother found, what Sargent brought to us, it's going to stop bad people from hurting more animals. But right now you need to be brave. You need to protect Sargent and Ash, just like they protected you. Can you do that?" Emma held his gaze steadily, something of Marie's determination flashing in her blue eyes. "Yes, but you have to promise to come get us." "I promise," David vowed, pressing a kiss to her forehead before gently pushing her toward Sarah, who stood ready at the back door. "Now go. Stay quiet. Stay hidden." As his daughter disappeared into the woods, Sargent summoning previously unseen strength to follow despite her weakness, David turned to face whatever was coming. The USB drive and the evidence it contained were safely tucked in his pocket. Mike stood beside him, radio in hand, already calling for backup. Outside, Bennett's voice called out, falsely friendly but with an undercurrent of menace. "Wilson, we need to talk about those dogs of mine right now." David exchanged a grim look with Mike. The final confrontation had arrived, but this time they had Marie's evidence, and the truth was finally about to come to light. David Wilson stepped onto the front porch of the cabin, deliberately pulling the door closed behind him. Mike Thompson remained inside, positioning himself by the window with his service weapon drawn, radioing quietly for backup. On the gravel driveway, 3 vehicles had parked haphazardly: Bennett's mud-spattered truck and 2 unfamiliar SUVs with out-of-state plates. Bennett himself stood at the bottom of the porch steps, flanked by 2 men David didn't recognize, both with the hard, watchful eyes of professionals accustomed to dangerous situations, not local hunters or friends, but hired muscle. "Wilson," Bennett called out, his false joviality stretched thin over obvious tension. "Seems we got off on the wrong foot last time. Thought we might clear things up today." "Nothing to clear up, Bennett," David replied evenly, measuring the distance between himself and the men, gauging time. Every minute he kept them talking was another minute for Emma, Sarah, and the dogs to get deeper into the woods, another minute closer to the sheriff's arrival. "Those dogs aren't yours, never were." Bennett's friendly facade slipped, his expression hardening. "You're in over your head, Wilson. This isn't about a couple of mutts anymore. My associates here have invested considerable resources in my breeding program, and they're not leaving without their property." "Breeding program?" David allowed a note of contempt to enter his voice, deliberately provoking. "Is that what you call shooting dogs and using them to hunt endangered species illegally?" The 2 strangers exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by David's specific knowledge. Bennett's face flushed with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snarled. "Where's the dog and her pup and that USB drive your brat found?" David felt a chill run through him at the mention of the drive. Someone had been watching them, perhaps for days. "There's no USB drive," he lied smoothly. "And the dog you shot is dead. Your associates can file an insurance claim." One of the men stepped forward, tall, with silver hair and an expensive watch glinting at his wrist. His accent was European, possibly German. "Mr. Wilson, there is no need for unpleasantness. We are businessmen. Name your price for the surviving puppy and the data, and we can resolve this situation to everyone's benefit." "Not interested," David said flatly. The man sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. "Then, I'm afraid we must insist." He nodded to his companion, who reached beneath his jacket with practiced efficiency. Before the situation could escalate further, the distant wail of sirens broke the tension. Bennett's head snapped toward the sound, panic replacing his anger. "You called the cops?" he demanded. "You fool! You have no idea what you're involved in." "Actually," Mike's voice came from the doorway as he stepped onto the porch beside David, badge and weapon clearly visible, "he knows exactly what he's involved in. Roy Bennett, you're under arrest for illegal hunting, animal cruelty, theft of government property, and conspiracy to commit wildlife trafficking. Your friends here might want to add obstruction of justice and threatening a federal witness to their resumes." Bennett's associates were already retreating toward their vehicles, clearly unwilling to risk confrontation with law enforcement. Bennett himself stood frozen, calculation visible on his face as he weighed his options. "This isn't over," he finally spat, backing toward his truck. "Those dogs are still mine. I've got paperwork." "Forged paperwork," Mike interrupted calmly, "contradicted by the military service records and microchip data we've recovered. It's over, Bennett. The only question is how many charges you'll face when we're done." As the sheriff's patrol cars crested the hill, Bennett made a desperate lunge for his truck. He managed to wrench the door open before the first deputies arrived, weapons drawn, ordering him to freeze. What followed was controlled chaos. Bennett taken into custody, his associates detained for questioning, statements given, evidence secured. Through it all, David's thoughts remained fixed on Emma and the dogs, hidden somewhere in the dense woods behind the cabin. It was nearly an hour before he could finally break away from the investigators, Mike accompanying him as they headed into the forest toward the old hunter's blind. The small wooden structure had been built by David's father decades earlier, positioned on a slight rise overlooking a natural clearing where deer often grazed at dusk. "Emma," David called as they approached, not wanting to startle them. "It's Dad, and Mike. It's safe now." The door of the blind creaked open and Sarah's face appeared, tight with worry but unharmed. "We're here," she called back, "but you need to hurry." The urgency in her voice sent David sprinting the remaining distance. Inside the small shelter, he found Emma kneeling beside Sargent, who lay on her side, breathing shallowly. Ash pressed against her, whimpering softly, his muzzle resting on his mother's neck. "She got us here," Sarah explained quietly, and then collapsed. "I've done what I can with the supplies we had, but she's fading, David. She used the last of her strength getting Emma to safety." David knelt beside his daughter, who looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You promised she'd be okay," Emma whispered, accusation and plea mingling in her voice. "I know, sweetheart," David answered, his own throat tight with emotion. "And we're going to try everything we can." Together they fashioned a stretcher from Mike's jacket and branches cut from nearby saplings. With infinite care they lifted Sargent onto the makeshift carrier, Emma walking beside her the entire journey back to the cabin, one hand never leaving the dog's fur. Ash followed solemnly, unusually subdued, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Back at the cabin, now bustling with law enforcement, Dr. Brennan had arrived from Bristol, alerted by Sarah's emergency call. Her examination of Sargent was quick but thorough, her expression grim as she administered medications and established an IV drip. The exertion was too much, she told David privately, while Emma sat with Sargent in the mudroom. Her system was already compromised. I'm sorry, but I don't think she's going to recover from this setback. David felt the weight of those words like a physical blow. "She saved my daughter's life today," he said, voice raw. "Somehow she knew danger was coming. She led them to safety despite barely being able to walk." Dr. Brennan's professional detachment softened. "That kind of loyalty, it's extraordinary. But it doesn't change her physical condition. The kindest thing now would be to let her go peacefully, without further suffering." David nodded, the inevitable decision settling heavily upon him. "Let me talk to Emma first." He found his daughter exactly as he'd left her, seated cross-legged beside Sargent's bed, Ash curled in her lap. The German shepherd's breathing had grown more labored, her once bright eyes clouded with pain despite the medications. David began gently, crouching beside her. "Dr. Brennan thinks Sargent is suffering. She thinks it might be time to say goodbye." Emma didn't look up, her fingers continuing their gentle stroking of Sargent's fur. "She's not ready yet," she said with quiet certainty. "She's waiting." "Waiting for what, sweetheart?" "For us to see." Emma finally raised her eyes to meet her father's. "Mom's last message. The one only Sargent knows." David felt a fresh wave of grief at his daughter's determined denial. "Emma, sometimes when we love someone, the bravest thing we can do is let them go when they're in pain." "That's not what Mom said," Emma countered, her voice surprisingly steady. "Her letter said, when all three pieces are united, the truth will be clear." "We found the USB drive and the chip in Mom's tag, but we haven't really looked at what was in Sargent's tracker." The conviction in his daughter's voice gave David pause. "Mike has the data from the tracker. He's reviewing it now with the investigators." Not all of it, Emma insisted. Sergeant knows where to look. She gently shifted Ash from her lap and took the puppy's face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes as if communicating silently. After a moment, Ash yipped once and trotted purposefully toward the living room, where Mike and his team had set up their equipment. David followed, bewildered, watching as Ash went directly to Mike's laptop, placing his paw deliberately on the keyboard. "What's he doing?" one of the investigators asked, reaching to move the puppy away from the sensitive equipment. "Wait," Mike said, studying the screen where Ash's paw had accidentally opened a new file, one they hadn't noticed before. "There's something here." The file contained a video, date-stamped 3 years earlier. Mike clicked play, and Marie Wilson's face filled the screen. David felt the world stop around him. His wife, alive, vibrant, determined, looked out from the screen, her familiar features sending a shock of recognition through him. "If you're watching this," Marie's recorded voice said. Then, "Sergeant has completed her mission and found my family. David, Emma, I'm so sorry for the secrecy. What began as a routine investigation into missing military working dogs led me to discover something much bigger." She explained how she'd uncovered Bennett's operation, how she'd gathered evidence over months working with military intelligence, how she'd begun training Sergeant specifically for Emma, knowing her daughter's special connection with animals would someday be her greatest strength. "If something happens to me," Marie continued, her voice steady despite the implicit acknowledgement of danger, "Sergeant has been trained to protect the evidence and find you. Trust her. She knows things we don't." The video ended with Marie looking directly into the camera, her expression softening. "Emma, my brave girl, Sergeant will be the guardian I can't be. She'll understand you in ways others can't. David, trust our daughter's instincts. They're stronger than you know." In the silence that followed, David became aware of movement behind him. Emma stood in the doorway, Sergeant leaning heavily against her small frame, somehow on her feet despite her weakness. The German Shepherd's eyes were fixed on the now dark screen where Marie's face had been moments before, a low whine escaping her throat. "She needed us to know," Emma said simply. "She needed to finish her mission." Mike cleared his throat, emotion evident despite his professional demeanor. "She has? This video confirms everything, establishes the chain of evidence, proves Marie was working officially. Bennett and his entire network are finished." David knelt before Sergeant, gently taking her graying muzzle in his hands. "You did it," he whispered, tears flowing freely now. "You brought her message home. You found Emma, just like Marie trained you to do." Something shifted in Sergeant's eyes then, a release, a completion. She turned her gaze to Emma, pressing her head against the child's chest one last time before her legs buckled. David caught her as she fell, supporting her weight as he and Emma guided her back to her bed. Ash followed, unusually solemn, as if understanding what was happening. Together, the three of them surrounded Sergeant as her breathing grew more labored. "It's okay now," Emma whispered, stroking the dog's head. "You can rest. We'll take care of Ash, I promise." With one final shuddering breath, Sergeant's eyes closed. Her mission complete, Marie's last guardian finally found peace. 5 years later. The sign at the entrance read Marie Wilson Memorial Canine Training Center, freshly painted for the grand opening ceremony. Behind it stretched the renovated barn and training fields where once Roy Bennett had conducted his illegal operations, now transformed into a facility dedicated to training service dogs for children with autism and other special needs. 13-year-old Emma Wilson stood at the podium, more confident now, but still with the same quiet intensity that had always defined her. Beside her sat Ash, now a magnificent adult German Shepherd, with his mother's intelligent eyes and unwavering loyalty. "My mom believed that sometimes the best guardians come with 4 paws," Emma began, her voice clear despite the crowd of community members, reporters, and officials gathered for the occasion. "She believed that animals can reach us in ways humans sometimes can't." The sergeant, proved her right. In the front row, David watched his daughter with pride mingled with bittersweet memory. The past 5 years had brought challenges, custody hearings, criminal trials where Emma had testified about Bennett's animal abuse, the ongoing adjustment to life after trauma. But they had brought healing, too. Emma continued her speech, explaining how the center would pair specially trained dogs with children who, like her, experienced the world differently, how each dog would be rescued from shelters or difficult circumstances, given purpose and a forever home, how Ash himself had become the program's first demonstration of success, helping Emma navigate middle school, social interactions, and the lingering grief of multiple losses. Behind the stage, the first class of training dogs waited with their handlers, German Shepherds, Labradors, and mixed breeds, all selected for intelligence and empathy, all beginning their journey toward becoming someone's guardian. As Emma concluded her remarks, she knelt beside Ash, wrapping her arms around his neck in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. "Mom sent Sargent to save me," she told the audience. "Now we're going to save others, because sometimes a dog isn't just a pet. Sometimes they're the bridge we need to find our way home." After the ceremony, as the crowds dispersed toward the reception area, David found Emma sitting quietly on the porch of what had once been Bennett's office, now converted into the center's administrative building. Ash lay at her feet, alert as always, his head rising as David approached. "You did beautifully," David told her, settling onto the step beside his daughter. "Your mom would be so proud." Emma nodded, her gaze on the distant mountains. "I still miss them. Mom, Sargent." "I know," David said softly. "Me too. But they're still with us," Emma continued, her hand resting on Ash's head. "Every time he understands something I can't say out loud. Every time he helps one of the other kids find their voice." David put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, feeling the strength that had grown in her over the years, a resilience born of loss but tempered by love. "The first training class starts next week," Emma said after a moment, excitement creeping into her voice. 5 kids, 5 dogs. I get to help with the training." "They couldn't ask for a better teacher," David assured her. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Ash suddenly lifted his head, ears perked toward the training fields. Without a word, he rose and trotted a few steps in that direction, then looked back at Emma expectantly. Emma smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed her serious face. "He wants to show me something," she explained, already rising to follow. "That's the signal Mom taught Sargent, the one that means this is important." David watched as his daughter and her guardian moved across the fields together, silhouettes against the setting sun, separate beings moving as one, a partnership forged in grief but sustained by something deeper. In them he saw echoes of everything they had lost, but also the promise of all that might still be found, one connection at a time. Life would never be what he had planned, what he and Marie had dreamed together, but watching Emma and Ash, David felt something he had once thought lost forever: peace. The shepherd's gift had not only been the evidence that brought justice or even the protection of his daughter. The true gift had been showing them all how to build something new from the fragments of what was broken, a family redefined, a purpose reborn. Together they would carry Marie's legacy forward, one child, one dog, one bridge at a time. In our twilight years, we often reflect on life's deepest truths, that loss and love are 2 sides of the same precious coin. Emma and Sargent's story reminds us that sometimes healing comes in unexpected forms, through the loyal eyes of a German shepherd who carried a mother's final message across impossible distances. For those of us who've weathered our own storms of grief, who stood at crossroads wondering how to rebuild after unimaginable loss, this story whispers hope. Remember how Emma's autism wasn't a limitation but a gift that allowed her to understand what others couldn't hear? How David learned to trust his daughter's heart when logic failed? Like many of you who've raised children through difficulty, sacrificed dreams for family, or reinvented yourselves after tragedy, the Wilsons discovered that broken paths sometimes lead to beautiful destinations. The center they built honors not just Marie's memory, but the resilience we all carry within us, the capacity to transform pain into purpose. As you consider your own legacy, remember that our greatest gifts often emerge from our deepest wounds. What shepherd has guided you home? What messages of love still echo long after goodbye? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply follow, trusting that love knows the way. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.